Welcome to Edwards Beyond the Test, a podcast that goes behind the scenes of the flight test mission at Edwards Air Force Base. I'm Dawn Waldman from the 412th Test Wing, Public Affairs. The subject of today's program is steeped with rich history made by the brave men and women who have learned to push the boundaries of what is possible. Its alumni have gone on to achieve the inconceivable that not only advanced the U.S. Air Force, but the world. If you haven't guessed, I'm talking about the United States Air Force Test Pilot School. It's located right here at Edwards Air Force Base. We'll be talking with a few TPS team members today, but first, let me introduce the Commandant of TPS, Colonel Ryan Blake. Sir, welcome to Beyond the Test.
Thanks, Don. It's very great to be here.
So for those unfamiliar with it, tell us about the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School.
Sure. Test Pilot School is the graduate school for test and evaluation in the Air Force. So we have, of course, in the test center, many hundreds and thousands of people who are working test. Very few have actually gone through the Test Pilot School. So the Test Pilot School is, again, the master's degree graduate level education in test. We use our Test Pilot School graduates as the enablers, the folks who have had a very deep education in tests to be able to go into organizations that are staffed with folks who have lots of experience in tests, but maybe who have not gone through the school. And so we can use that exquisite education in the school to enable those teams some more. The school itself has a long history. It is right now a year-long school. We've got about a $32 million a year budget.
Oh, my.
Absolutely, that we put our students through in a combination of academics and flying and projects. Very difficult year for the students, but at the end of the year, they come out with a Master's of Science degree in Flight Test Engineering, and they are certified as flight testers, both pilots and engineers and combat systems officers.
So you mentioned that we have pilots. What type of pilots do we have in TPS?
Sure. We have all sorts of different pilots. So pilots from a bunch of different communities, both manned and unmanned. So in our school, we'll have airlift pilots, tanker pilots, bomber pilots, fighter pilots, unmanned aircraft pilots. All different communities in the Air Force come through our school. They all go through the same school no matter what community they came from. They get the same education. They fly the same sorties. They fly the same airplanes during Test Pilot School. And then generally at the end of Test Pilot School, they will go back to their area of expertise. If they came in from airlift, they may do a lot of tests on an F-16 while they're at the school, but they will typically after that go back to airlift so they can use their operational experience.
So, sir, there are pilots naturally throughout the Air Force. Why don't they use those pilots instead of having a special breed of test pilots?
So that's actually a really good question, and that goes back to where Test Pilot School started. So Test Pilot School is actually older than the Air Force itself. It started back in 1944 with the Army Air Forces. And at the time, they were doing exactly what your question implied, was they were using operational pilots to do their test. And what they found is that whereas that worked somewhat, it really took an understanding by the pilots to understand what the engineers were asking them to do. So if they were going out to do a specific excess power test, for example, if the pilots didn't understand the engineering behind it, a lot of times their in-flight decisions would not be appropriate for that particular test. So back in 1944, the Army Air Forces decided that they needed to train pilots the engineering concepts behind those tests and then the specific techniques such that they had a cadre of exquisitely trained individuals who knew exactly what the engineers were going for. And that continues today. We need to take our pilots who are operationally focused and who are very good at what they do, and our weapons systems officers and our engineers, all who have had operational experience, whether it's in a lab or a program office as an engineer or in combat as a pilot or a combat systems officer, take those operational experiences and now teach them how to apply those to test and then bring them into a new community test such that they can marry their operational experience with their now new test knowledge.
Well, in the past, you didn't have engineers and weapons systems operators also going to the school. That evolved over time.
That's exactly right. And that, in fact, is one of the key things the Test Pilot School does is it evolves over time. And so as you point out at the beginning, and of course the name that we still carry implies this. At the beginning, it was a pilot school, right? We took pilots and we put them through the Test Pilot School. And so those very first graduates were all pilots because that's what the school was aimed at. Engineers were always a part of the test team. As a matter of fact, the engineers started it, and they said, we need the pilots to understand this, right? So they were always part of the team, but they weren't graduates of the school actually until the 70s. It wasn't until the 70s that the Air Force realized, well, we need to be putting our engineers and our navigators, our combat systems officers, all through the same course together such that they can operate as a test team as soon as they graduate. And that's the way we operate now.
Colonel Blake, while at the school, the TPS students are learning the discipline of conducting tests safely. But, sir, once they graduate, how do they apply this in the functioning world of flight test?
Yeah, that's also a very good question, and that goes back to what we said, why we bring them in at their experience level to begin with. All of our graduates, whether they're pilots or combat systems officers or engineers, are going to go directly to a flight test squadron and combined task force. And so we expect them, once they get to that new organization, to take all of their operational background, which for pilots may have been thousands of hours of flying, in conjunction with the test fundamentals that they just learned for a year at test pilot school, and now marry those two skills to getting new technology out to the warfighter. Whether it's a brand new airplane or a new system on an airplane or a new weapon that's carried on an airplane, we want them to use their operational experience and their newfound test knowledge to get that technology as quick as they can out to the warfighter.
With all those students and the requirements to operate two separate classes simultaneously, it takes a team, quite a team, to ensure that smooth operation. About how many people work there? Are they all military? And can you describe their various roles for TPS?
Absolutely. So I think for the impact that we have and for the product that we produce, we've actually got a fairly small team that's doing that. So on staff, we really only have somewhere around 50 folks on staff at any one time. It's a mix of military and civilians and some contractors who are full-time with us, helping us put this together. So clearly, probably the first thing you would think about are our instructor pilots who are teaching our brand new pilots and engineers how to do the flight test techniques as they're up in the air. But of course, in addition to those instructor pilots, we have instructor engineers who are teaching the engineers how to run control rooms and how to functionally work as crew members in an aircraft while they're an engineer. And then, of course, we've got all of our large support staff that it takes to run all of the operation that we've got. So we need folks who are running operations scheduling for us, and we need folks who are doing plans and programs and contracting and finance and maintenance. Right, it takes a lot to run a flying organization and a university. And so when you put a flying organization together with a university, right, it's going to take several different disciplines to run that. And I'm actually amazed, frankly, that we're able to do that with the relatively small number of people we have in the school.
I didn't realize it was that few.
That's right.
I thought it was a larger number of employees that were there.
Yeah, and so what that means is that a lot of our instructors end up working a lot and very hard and becoming jacks of all trades, right? If we've got a program manager who also knows how to do contracting and finance and things like that, right? Because since we're a small, minimally manned organization, you need to get good at a lot of different things.
Well, TPS is so rich with history, it must make those who work there and attend the school feel full of pride. Well, let's talk about some of that incredible history. It all started back in Dayton, Ohio at Wright Pat before it came out here, right?
Yeah, that's right. So this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about. The history of the school is so rich and amazing that we really embrace our heritage at the Test Pilot School. And so every opportunity we get, we discuss it, we talk about where we've come from. And I think that does a couple of things for us. It certainly helps motivation working there, right? When you think of all the folks who have walked the same halls that you're walking and working in right now, you think of the things that they have gone on to do. And I think it also gives us perspective where we're going in the future. We see where TPS started and where it has gone over the years, and it gives us confidence that we can go new places as well. So as you mentioned, it started back in Dayton, Ohio. It actually started as a 3-month course. So like we talked about earlier, the engineers wanted their pilots to understand some basic engineering concepts and how to do a few flight test techniques. So it was very much a short course, 3 months about, okay, here's why you are flying by a tower really low and really fast. Here's the engineering behind it, and here's exactly what I want you to do and say. And so those first few classes was just that 3 months, just on those few things. After a few of those classes, and the questions they were answering in those first classes were performance questions. How far can this airplane go? How high can it fly? How fast can it go? Things like that. Very soon, pilots and engineers realized, well, that doesn't tell the full story, right? You also need to know how well it flies. And that's what they at the time termed stability and control, and we often call it flying qualities now.
Okay.
And so in just a few classes, they actually added another 3-month course that was to do with flying qualities. And so now it was a 6-month course in Dayton, Ohio. And it stayed that 6-month course until 1951 when the course moved out here to Edwards. Of course, if you've ever been to Dayton, Ohio, you realize that the weather is not always great out there.
Right.
There are no great big dry lake beds that you can land on. And in some portions, at least, it's fairly populous.
Right.
And so there are maybe folks that you don't want to fly over. Edwards Air Force Base at the time, the Muroc Gunnery Range didn't have any of those limitations. The weather was great. There was a great big dry lake bed. There weren't a whole lot of folks around that you might be a danger to. And so the school moved out here in 1951 as the Air Force Flight Test Center at the time was operating out of here as well. And once the school started in 1951 out at Edwards, it continued in that 6-month course really until the 60s. In the 60s, of course, when the space race heated up, there was a need for the Air Force to start training its own astronauts because the Air Force was planning on a manned spaceflight program.
Okay.
So NASA had their own program. Right. The Air Force was going to have a manned spaceflight program. And so the school actually added another 6 months called the Aerospace Research Pilot course. So pilots could go through 3 months of performance, 3 months of flying qualities, and then 6 months of effectively astronaut training. And so that's when Test Pilot School became a year-long school.
Okay.
It was at the end of the 60s when all the manned spaceflight programs for the Air Force were canceled. That's when there was no longer need to train astronauts in the school, but the systems complexity was really rising in the 70s. And so that 6-month ARPS astronaut training course was traded out for a systems course. And that's roughly where we are today, a year-long school that looks at flying qualities and performance and mission systems with an underlying test foundations background.
Well, with all that wonderful rich history and inspiration to those still coming on board to TPS, what is their motivation? Are they coming out here still to be test pilots?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think everybody is unique in the reasons why they want to come through, but we definitely see some trends. Everybody who applies to test pilot school, number one, because of the background that we make them have, right, is already got an engineering background and they're very technically minded. And so I think for the majority, probably all of our students, all of our applicants who come through, they are really excited about developing new technology and getting that out to the warfighter. Now, we talked about spaceflight and being an astronaut and things like that. Clearly, historically, many of astronauts have been test pilot school graduates.
Yes,
and so I believe that's in the back of many students' minds as they're applying to test pilot school, that if NASA happens to open up an astronaut application window, I will certainly apply, right? Mm-hmm. So I do believe that a lot of folks ultimately would love to go into space. But fortunately, even if you don't end up in space in NASA, the things that you are doing as flight testers in the Air Force Test Center are amazing, and it is completely fulfilling. And that's definitely what I thought when I came through the school. Once I came out the other end, I thought I would like to do this forever because I'm having such a big impact. It's such an exciting time, and I get to see the fruit of my labor go directly to warfighters.
We'll talk more with Colonel Blake later in the program, but when we come back, we'll talk with the technical director for TPS, Mr. David Van Hoy. Welcome back to Edwards Beyond the Test. Today we're talking about the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School. It's located right here at Edwards. We're now talking with Mr. David Van Hoy, who is the technical director of the school. Hey, Dave, thanks for being here.
Well, good morning, Miss Dawn. Hello to all your listeners. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with you about one of my favorite subjects, your United States Air Force Test Pilot School.
It's an awesome place indeed. So previously when we talked before, you told me that your job as tech director is a position with many aspects that you oversee at the school, from being sort of like a dean and more than that. Can you explain some of that to us?
I've been involved in TPS for a long time. I've been tech director for about 10 years, and you learn the longer you stay in one place, the more jobs they give you.
Okay.
So I kind of describe myself as I'm the chief chef and chief bottle washer. I kind of do it all.
Okay.
And the dean part as the guy responsible for the technical aspects of the curriculum. That's one of the most important roles. Technical aspects involving not only the academics, but the labs and the sims and the flights. It's multifaceted, which makes the job pretty interesting. Other things I do is the head civilian supervisor, so I'm responsible for the care and feeding, taking care of our just world-class staff. I'm so fortunate to work with some of the most brilliant, dedicated folks around. So taking care of them is easy. It's usually just trying to guide them in a direction and then turn them loose. Another part of my role is being the guy who's been there a long time is I know where all things are and where all things work. So strategic planning, trying to make sure we have the right resources, the right aircraft, the right simulators, the right number of people, the right types of people, the money that makes things go.
Yes.
So I spend a lot of time doing that.
Okay.
And I guess the final role is just as the civilian deputy. So I work really closely with Colonel Blake and all the previous commandants I've had the pleasure to work with. We work as a team, and it's a really good construct. It's very similar to what you see across the Air Force Test Center with military leadership and civilian deputies. So the military bring in the leadership training, the national defense strategy, the vision of the Air Force. They bring in recent experience with other areas of the Air Force. And the civilian deputies, we provide the continuity. We've been here a long time, so we know how all the local procedures work. We've got the depth in the particular area we're in. So we work as a great team.
Hey, let's talk about the curriculum and the development aspect of that. There are 2 classes each year with a total of 48 students who are in an 11-month program. And, while there is some continuity from year to year, you and your amazing team of professionals are frequently revamping that curriculum. So why is that necessary?
Our graduates go on to work with and test the most current technology in the U.S. Air Force. So they need the skills to be effective once they graduate. Okay. So we have to constantly bring in these emerging capabilities. I mean, the big words you hear about today, you can't go to any high-level meeting without talking about cyber and space and RPAs and small UASs and directed energy. It's all in autonomy. All those technologies are being developed rapidly. So our graduates need to be familiar with that capability. The challenge is we also need to continue focusing on the fundamentals of test.
Right.
At the end of the day, that is probably the most critical thing we do is educate these future testers into the mindset and the principles and the system engineering approach to be able to test anything at all that gets thrown their way. And then we try to expose them to the new technology and so they can apply those time-proven principles in new ways. We want them to be creative. Now doing that in a fixed container, because our curriculum is not growing.
In each TPS class, there's always international students. Why do we have that program?
Well, that's a good question. Our international program is important for a number of reasons. I mean, first and foremost, just look at the current worldwide threat environment. The U.S. needs allies. We need to build coalitions in order to effectively fight the war on terror, in order to protect U.S. interests abroad. So our program helps promote this international cooperation. I would say, in many cases, the foreign national students who attend TPS, they are just rising stars at their home country. They are folks that are on the fast track for chief of staff positions and senior leadership positions in their military. They're all incredibly talented, incredibly brilliant. It's not only about understanding how the U.S. Air Force works and our military, it's learning about American culture.
Right.
And they're immersed in a program side by side with all these U.S. students, and you learn about each other. So I guess the international program works the other way too. It gives our U.S. students exposure to our international partners and their culture and their way of life and the way they approach military situations, the way they approach tests. So it's a good education for our students as well. And it works both ways.
Well, Dave, I know you graduated from TPS in 1994. Compared to that time, are there more international students? And what about women students?
No and yes.
Okay.
We see about the same number of international students. I mean, the international student program dates back to the 50s. So we have generally 2 to 3 international students in every class. So that hasn't changed. Now, my class in 94 was a bit of an anomaly, so I'm not going to talk about that too much.
Okay.
But my senior class, 93 Bravo, they had 3 international students in that class, 3 students from Korea. So that part hasn't changed. The part that has changed is the number of women students. That has changed for the better. There's a lot more women that are coming through the course. It's rare now that we don't have one or two women students, usually an engineer and a pilot. The current junior class is the first to have actually 5 women students. We have 3 flight test engineers and 2 pilots.
Wow.
Which is incredible.
That's awesome.
Our class back in '94 had 0, but my senior class did have 2 ladies in the class. One was a flight test engineer, Dana Schindler, and one was a pilot, Jackie Van Ovost, who is now I think she's now a 3-star working at Air Force headquarters at the Pentagon doing amazing things for the Air Force.
That's awesome.
So you go in to see any of the women's students we've had in the past generally have pretty amazing careers.
So while the students are attending their classes, also crammed into the schedule is flying in quals. And for the students who are pilots, by the way, they're now flying aircraft they're probably not familiar with. What does quals mean?
Qualitative evaluation program is designed to reinforce our curriculum desired learning objectives. So that is, planning, executing, and when I say execute, I mean flying the aircraft, doing flight test techniques.
Okay.
So you're executing the plan, which is the fun part.
Right.
But the important part that we have to develop. So you're planning, you're executing, and then you're analyzing and reporting. So we reinforce those learning objectives through the QUAL program. One of our overall goals is to create highly adaptive, critical thinking flight test professionals. So how do you create somebody who's highly adaptive?
Right.
One of the ways is you put them in different situations and you allow them to deal with their being uncomfortable and being in a new environment. And you do that enough, eventually you become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you learn how to handle new and dynamic situations that you haven't maybe have previous experience with. And that QUAL program is incredibly important for us to do that. When you fly a bunch of different airplanes, eventually you realize they're all very similar in certain ways. When you graduate and you're working in your test program and things don't go quite as planned, you can rely on that experience you've had at TPS to remain cool, calm, and collected. One notion we say is if there's an emergency, stop, wind your watch, catch your breath, follow your procedures, follow your training. Not always easy in a very dynamic situation, but the stereotypical test pilot, when you're in an air vehicle that's gone out of control and it's plummeting toward the ground at 10,000 feet a minute and things are going crazy, you want the test pilot to sit there and be cool and calm and relay data and talk about what's happening to help people solve this problem. And at the same time, working diligently to recover the airplane. Right. And they all want to sound like, a good Southerner over the radio. Everything's going nice and fine up here. It just conveys confidence.
Right.
So in order to create folks like that, we use part of our QUAL program to let them fly all these unusual airplanes.
Well, another unique aircraft you have at the school is the Vista F-16. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, Ms. Don, that airplane is incredibly unique. It's a one-of-a-kind, highly modified F-16. And for your listeners out there on the radio, I just want them to know that you've got a beautiful picture of our F-16 Vista right up here on the wall with this amazing new paint scheme, highlighting the heritage of Edwards with the orange.
Flight test orange.
Flight test orange colors and the TPS tail flash. It's truly an amazing vehicle. The airplane itself, being a highly modified F-16, is set up so that it's got a control system that allows you to put research control laws into the airplane and fly those research control laws, but still keep the airplane safe because it's got a flight control system that has safety trips that monitor the airplane states. And if you send commands that are going to exceed certain parameters, it will kick off the research system.
So it saves the day, basically.
It does. It allows us to do rapid prototyping and try new flight control strategies in a way that we can do it quickly but safely. You and I could sit down today with a computer in MATLAB, and we can walk through and we could design a control system, and we could implement that in Vista tonight and fly it tomorrow safely.
That's amazing.
Because the system itself, the overlying system of the airplane, has these safety trips that if we made a sign error and we meant for the airplane to go up and it's going down, the system will kick that research system off and return back to a normal F-16 so we can rapidly look at new technology.
So in the VISTA, which by the way stands for Variable Stability In-Flight Simulator, the student sits in the front seat instead of the back.
This is the only F-16 in the world that's set up where the primary cockpit is the rear cockpit. So our instructor pilots who are highly trained test pilots who have specific skills that allow them to fly Vista and act as safety pilots. It's not only, I didn't mention this, it's not only the control system in Vista which has the safety trips that keep the airplane safe. It's many times the safety pilot, our highly experienced test pilot in the rear cockpit that has the ability to kick that system off. But the rear cockpit is designed, it looks like the front cockpit of a normal F-16.
Okay.
That's where you start the engine. That's where you run your flight control checks. You have all your emergency switches located in the back cockpit. And the front cockpit is set up for the evaluator pilot. So any of our students, they all fly in the front seat, including engineers.
I was going to ask that.
So engineers, that is one of their best stories of the year because they actually get to see out the front of an F-16 as compared to the back of somebody's helmet. So the evaluator pilot sits in the front, and it has different the word we use now is inceptors. So it has programmable flight control inputs. It even has a center stick, which is uncommon. It is, well, I won't say uncommon. It is not found in any other F-16 on the planet. So we can modify the stick characteristics as well in the front seat for the evaluator pilot.
Well, a large part of the 11-month program is the test management program, which along with an exam goes toward the students receiving their accredited Masters of Science in Flight Test Engineering degree. So, Dave, can you describe what the TMPs are and how you come up with them, and also how the Air Force gains from this program?
Well, Ms. Dawn, our test management projects are truly amazing in multiple ways. Related to the curriculum, they provide an opportunity for the students to work a test program from beginning to end. Nowhere else in their career may they have that opportunity.
Why?
Because the programs last longer than the time they spend in the test units.
Okay.
If you go to the F-35 squadron right now, the plane's been flying for a long time, and you're in the middle of a program that's developing either the avionics or the software or the weapons integration, and you would work that program, and then 2 years later you'll leave. So you don't see the whole thing. So that program we introduced to the students at about the halfway point in their TPS class time. And right now, as you and I sit here and talk, I have 4 TMPs in my senior class executing. Some are airborne right now, which is exciting time for them because it's new.
Right.
It's not the same turn performance flight in a T-38 that's been done for 30 years.
Right.
This is brand new.
And it's theirs.
It's theirs, and they own it. So they're doing the execution right now. They had 2 weeks to gather data, and then they're going to have 2 months between now and end of the year, for the end of the year for them because they graduate in June, to analyze the data and write a report.
Okay.
And they put out a full technical information memo report and a briefing that they give the school at the end of the year.
What are some examples of the TMPs?
We've had multiple projects looking at navigation in GPS-denied environments, which is a high-interest item in the Air Force. We've looked down, we've looked up, we've used lasers, we've used visual sensors, we use IR sensors. We got a program right now that's out there looking at cell towers and cell phone signals to geolocate their position. We've had different antennas that can determine arrival direction of different signals, all trying to do the basic navigation.
Okay.
Where am I in space?
Right.
So we can take an inertial navigation unit, which drifts over time. So, imagine the GPS in your car. If it wasn't a GPS, if it was an inertial navigation unit, every hour you could be up to maybe a mile away from where you think you are.
Oh.
So you have to update it. GPS updates it all the time. So it keeps you right where you think you are. But if that GPS signal goes away, how do we navigate? You have to update this inertial measurement unit with your current position. So we're trying to find ways to figure out where you are in space. So we've done a bunch of programs with those.
Well, for those who are fortunate to visit TPS, they find a team of incredibly passionate professionals working in a fast-paced, ever-changing environment. And Dave, that includes you. You graduated here in '94, and you've worked here for the past 10 years as tech director. So please tell us what it is that makes you want to be at the center of the aerospace testing universe.
Well, Don, I'm not going to lie. My initial reasons for coming to Edwards were purely selfish. We're all self-motivated.
Okay.
I came here because I wanted to work on cutting-edge technology. I wanted to fly and work with the hottest airplanes, the coolest stuff, everything that was new. There was an opportunity to fly in high-performance airplanes as a flight test crew member. Mm-hmm. So those two things were what motivated me to come here. And in fairness, that was never my plan when I was going through college.
It wasn't?
It wasn't. I was it wasn't until I was a senior at Georgia Tech studying aerospace engineering that I ran into a guy, Air Force Lieutenant John Humphreys, who was a Georgia Tech grad, a couple years older than me. I didn't know him while I was at the school, but he was back just visiting the university, and we ran into each other in the hallway outside at one of our compressible aero classes, I think. And he had just been selected to come to Air Force Test Pilot School as an engineer. Mm-hmm. And he starts telling me about all these cool things going on at this place called the Air Force Flight Test Center that I really didn't know much about. Being a southern boy from the country, we don't get out much. So he's telling me these cool things they're doing and just really got me excited. And then he handed me this brochure that Edwards put out at the time as a recruiting tool. And I still remember this because on the cover of this glossy brochure was an F-4, one of the airplanes they were using for mission support. So it was the white and orange F-4, two-seater. And climbing into the back of that airplane was a civilian engineer. And I learned later, it's Mark Crawford, who is a friend of mine now, and he's currently the deputy director with the Electronic Warfare Group. Yes. So he was getting ready for a flight in an F-4 doing flight test. And I thought right then, that's what I got to do. So I didn't just pack up and head straight here. I already had a research assistantship in grad school at the University of Maryland, so I did that first. And then got in my car, took I-40, and drove to Edwards.
Wow.
Now, for the full story, that's what brought me out here. But that's really not what keeps me here. My intention was to be here probably no more than 4 or 5 years. Okay. And then go work for some major airplane manufacturer and design airplanes. Okay. I mean, that was my vision at the time. But that didn't turn out that way. I think what really keeps me here more than anything is probably two things.
What's that?
Truly.
Okay.
And one is the mission of this place. I'm just passionate about it. It's the ability to serve my country in some small way. I can contribute in developing capabilities for our airmen that are out there in harm's way every day. So we're doing things that are meaningful and impactful and important to me. So that's really what's kept me here. That, and the second thing is just, working with the people. The folks here are amazing. It's an honor to serve with some of the best and brightest and most dedicated individuals on the planet. There's not a day that goes by that I don't learn something new. And there's not a day that goes by that our group, our people, and our organization doesn't do something positive, impacting our country's future. So why would I leave? I got the best job in the Air Force.
Many thanks to Mr. David Van Hoy for joining us and taking us beyond the test. When we come back, we'll talk with another member of the TPS team, one who knows what it's like to be both the spouse of a student herself, and now serves as an instructor at the school. Welcome back to Edwards Beyond the Test. Today, we're talking about the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School located right here at Edwards. Our next guest is a TPS graduate, Mrs. Jessica Peterson. Hey, thanks for joining us today. Jessica, we'll talk about your time as a TPS student in just a moment, but first, let's talk about your present job.
I'm the branch chief right now for the Test Foundations portion of TPS, and it's about a year and a half old. Year and a half to 2 years old is how long that branch at TPS has existed. However, a lot of the material that we were teaching isn't necessarily new material. It's things that have always been in the curriculum, but it was under different portions of the curriculum, and it wasn't specifically drawn out to be foundational concepts. So what we've done now within Test Foundations is we've taken the different concepts of how do you plan for a program, how do you do the execution piece, the communication, the control rooms, how do you analyze that data, and then what I think is the most important, how do you report on that data? And we've made that its own course. We've said what the objectives are, and now we show the students, okay, now when you go out and you fly in a certain aircraft or you collect the data, here's the foundational concepts of how you apply that to any program, any type of flight test. And so that's kind of the differences with it. The other things with my group, we do the test management projects, which are the real-world applications of process test planning for customers. So we've had customers like DARPA, AFRL, Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, all over that have brought projects to us, and our students get to execute a real-world program within Test Foundations as well.
Previously, it was stated that the Test Foundations was not a formal program. How have the students reacted to this class?
I think that they understand more the intent of some of the objectives why we're teaching certain things. Before, an example would be we'd go out and we'd collect performance data on a C-12, which is how fast, how much fuel consumption, all those types of things. And there was a lot of foundational concepts on how do you have your communication right? How do you write down the data that you need? But we didn't explicitly tell the students that's what we were trying to teach them. They had to try to get it through osmosis. And now we tell them, hey, this is the objective. This is why we're teaching it a certain way. And yeah, we're doing that for performance on a C-12, but it has applications for so many other types of things. And so I think that it gives them a better, bigger picture, and further on in the curriculum, and hopefully when they take it to the different CTFs and the different platforms, they can apply those objectives and those concepts to a wider variety of things.
Well, so you're from the local area.
I am.
Okay, and you've been on staff at TPS for about 1.5 years now. I'd like to talk to you about how you first came back to being at Edwards, going back to 2005.
Yeah, so it's a funny story. So I grew up in the Antelope Valley, surrounded by flight tests, surrounded by the B-2 being built out at Palmdale and seeing that fly. And I'll tell you very honestly, I was not super excited about flight tests. It's something that was in my backyard, and I saw it all the time. And I just wasn't an airplane nut like a lot of the people that are out here. So what happened was in 2005, I was finishing up my degree in mechanical engineering. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I was thinking maybe biomechanics, bioengineering was appealing. I thought maybe law school, patent law. I had all these different things that I thought were interesting.
Okay.
But I needed to build my resume, and I needed to get some real world experience. And so there was a career fair that I went to. Tony Rubino was actually the one that I met at the career fair. I gave him my resume and I said, hey, I'm from the local area. I want to do an internship. I'm planning on being in the Antelope Valley. You guys should bring me out. And so he brought me out for a 6-month period. I did an internship, and I found out that I absolutely loved the job. It wasn't the airplanes. It was the people. Okay. It was the mission focus. Right. And so I got out here and I said, it's amazing. Everyone is working towards a common goal. They're working for the warfighter. There's this very strong team camaraderie that was going on. And so that's how I ended up out here in 2005. And then over time, my passion for aircraft and my passion for flying is what really evolved over that time. So I got the experience to go on flying status when I was at the 416th. That happened in 2015. And I found out, oh my gosh, I love flying. And then just kind of the natural progression was, well, I should try going to test pilot school. I'll get to fly in all these different aircraft and get more experience. And so, now here I am 15 years later, and I'm an airplane nut. I love airplanes. I love aerospace. It's like the perfect place to be. But it really kind of evolved over time, and it wasn't where I thought I was going to be when I was in college.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
With your degree in mechanical engineering, you eventually began, like you said, working for the 416th Flight Test Squadron.
Mm-hmm.
You worked on some really interesting programs to include the life-saving automatic ground collision avoidance system. It's also called AutoGCAS. What is it like knowing you were part of this major life-saving capability?
Yeah. So, right place, right time, I think, really for my career. I got to the 416th in 2011. Prior to that, I had done some work on Global Hawk. I had been doing UAVs.
Okay.
And so that background doing flight controls, guidance and control on UAVs really blended itself well with looking at automatic systems, because the automatic ground collision avoidance system is kind of that blend between, pilot in the aircraft, manned aircraft, and then having an automatic system that they have to interface with. So that's how I ended up on that program. I got there, like I said, 2011, and that's when we were just starting to do all our planning for what we called the design tryout. So it was to get the system on the production F-16 and figure out how we were going to get that fielded, try to find where any issues were before we got it fielded to the warfighter. Mm-hmm. And so I was there for about 5 years. I had the experience of seeing AutoGCAS first show up at the 416th. I was there for all the first flights for issues that we found and we got fixed, which really was very rewarding, to the point when we got word that we had the first save. So the first save, I love to tell the story. We had been working on AutoGCAS. We finally got it to the point where we were going to get it fielded on our airplanes. And there was a decision, there was a squadron that had to make the decision if they were going to take the new software that had just gone out there and if they were going to deploy their airplanes with that software.
F-16s?
The F-16s, okay. With AutoGCAS and other things that came with that software. Okay. And so they made the decision to field, to deploy, to field their aircraft with the brand new AutoGCAS software. And within 2 weeks is when we had our first save. So knowing
Seriously?
that we had just finished testing, we had just gotten it out there, and then we had our very first save. And the situation the pilot was in is he was doing strafe, which is where you're using the gun on the F-16 and you're trying to take out bad guys that were on the ground. And so he was downrange and he was getting calls from our warfighters, our guys on the ground saying they needed support.
Wow.
And so he came in doing strafe, trying to use his gun, got in a situation called target fixation, which is where you're very focused onto what's on the ground, and you might not be as aware of other factors. So your altitude, your airspeed, how steep you're diving. And that's when AutoGCAS came on and protected him and saved his life. And what was so rewarding about that from a test perspective is we had focused very much on that type of scenario. We had focused very much on the system working in that type of scenario. We'd actually found problems early on where it didn't work correctly. And so we had fixed that, got it fielded, and then had that first save. So it was so easy at that point for me to tie kind of my job satisfaction from directly what I had worked on to saving a pilot's life. And then after that, I think we've had 8 more saves since then. We had one pilot who is in training, so a new F-16 pilot. He lost consciousness from pulling too many Gs.
Okay.
And so there's another save. There's actually a video that you can see out on YouTube of that. You get to hear the audio and everything. That's really powerful and very impactful. And so he lost consciousness. AutoGCAS saved his life. Well, after that happened, him and his instructor pilot that was in another aircraft when it happened and saw everything happen, they came out to the 416th, met us, shook our hands. You get to see this person like, oh, wow, like I had this very direct impact on someone's life.
That's wonderful.
So very rewarding. I think, I've had a lot of amazing things that I've gotten to do in my career. That probably is the highlight, though, is like being able to work on the automatic ground collision avoidance system, knowing that there's things at the 416th that we found and fixed, and that's what resulted in saving guys' lives. Really amazing.
It is amazing. And it really brings home, the idea of this is why we test for the warfighter.
Right.
Totally.
That's why we take the risks, I like to use that as one of my talking points when I'm instructing the students at TPS is I show them a test point that we did that was higher risk. We were taking the airplane close to some of its limits. And I tell them, hey, this is why we do it, because it's representative of what guys are going to do out in the field. And so it's very important we check it and we make sure everything's working right before we put it out there. Because if the system didn't work right, then we have guys whose lives probably wouldn't have been saved.
Well, Jessica, I really appreciate you took time out to come see us today. You're here in a flight suit. So you've been on a mission already
Yeah,
today.
I flew this morning. Weather wasn't great, but it's always good to go fly, right?
Right. Well, thank you for coming. But before I let you leave, what is it that excites you the most? I know working for the warfighter and doing all of that is so important to you, but you're here at the center of the aerospace testing universe. And what excites you about being here?
So I try to think back of what, when I first got here, what was the most exciting? Like I said, it was the people, right? It was the mission focus of everyone. I think the other thing is it's an air show, and I know this is quaint. Probably everyone says this, but it's an air show every day, right? Like you see different aircraft every single day. And I mean, especially at test pilot school, we have different qual aircraft that we bring in. So we have the T-33 that's been out here the last couple of weeks, which is the first jet trainer that was ever built for the Air Force. And so that's amazing to have. Right now, we're trying to get the students P-51 flights, which is amazing. So I mean, truly, like we have these amazing aircraft, and that's very exciting. The other thing that I love seeing is the people that come to visit that are passionate about the work out here, as well as the new engineers. Like the thing that I love seeing is how, they come out here and they have stars in their eyes and they're excited about, getting to work on maybe the air collision avoidance system or Death Claw, which is going to be automated strafing on the F-16, which is going to be awesome, or all the different variety of things. Like that's really, sometimes when you've been here for a while, you kind of forget, like all the stuff that's going on. And when you see new people that are excited and passionate about it, that's where I now get kind of my energy and my motivation. And man, being at test pilot school, every 6 months we have new students, right? So every 6 months we have this new influx of people that it's completely new to them and they're passionate and they're excited. And so that keeps kind of my excitement level up, having that influx of new people.
Well, many thanks to Mrs. Jessica Peterson for joining us and taking us beyond the test. When we come back, we'll head over to the test pilot school and learn more about the unique aircraft used for the flying quals. Welcome back to Edwards Beyond the Test. Today, we're talking about the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School, located right here at Edwards. Our next guest is the Test Pilot School Qualitative Evaluation Section Chief, Tech Sergeant Cody Fullerton. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Donna. I'm excited to be here.
Over the years, most of us can't help but notice the sometimes older, very unique aircraft that appear on the ramp behind TPS. They're there almost every week. Tell us what they are and where they come from.
Well, right now we have nine QE aircraft. One of them is the P-51 Mustang, but we do that out of Eglin. So we go on a trip for 2 weeks out of the year every year down to Eglin. And then we have the L-39 Albatross. We have the R-44 Robinson helicopter. We have the DC-3, the HU-16. Plenty of unique aircraft.
I've always thought that when Edwards had an aircraft on contract, as you do for the QE program, that maintenance was provided by the contractor. But that really isn't the case here. How is it that you and your teammates conduct the maintenance, and do you have technical orders for each one of those aircraft?
So for most of the aircraft, the contractor does bring maintenance personnel. What we do is we provide oversight to ensure that what they're doing is safe and by the book, and then also ensuring that it's safe for the test pilot students to fly that aircraft. So they bring all their maintenance manuals. They do all their own maintenance per se. What we do is provide support. So if they need fuel or they need whatever it is, we kind of have their back on that.
Tech Sergeant Fullerton, before I let you go, can you tell us what it means to you to be working at the center of the aerospace testing universe?
Well, I think that being in the program, being at the test pilot school is the uniqueness of it. So what it means to me would be, if I wasn't doing my job, we really wouldn't have a test program in the Air Force. So being able to get these students through and have them understand all the flight characteristics of all the unique aircraft that we do have and expanding on their breadth of experience, I think it's a pretty important thing.
Many thanks to Tech Sergeant Cody Fullerton for joining us and taking us beyond the test. When we come back, we'll talk with a current student from TPS Class 19 Bravo. Welcome back to Edwards Beyond the Test. Today we're talking about the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School, located right here at Edwards. Having recently celebrated its 75th anniversary, the school has educated and launched the careers of hundreds of test pilots, engineers, system operators, and more. It's a place so very special to those who have gone before, those who work here now, and those currently enrolled. And with that, we're back at the school, and I'm happy to introduce a current student from Class 19B, or Bravo, Captain Rachel Chiarte. So, Captain Chiarte, you're about 3 months away from graduation and in the middle of your test management program. Tell us about the student experience you've had over the past 8 months and why you wanted to attend TPS.
Well, I think the student experience so far has been absolutely amazing. This is probably the most hands-on learning that I've ever done in my entire life. Also, probably the busiest 9 months that I've ever had in my entire life as well. And you asked why I wanted to join TPS. Well, I think I always kind of knew about test pilot school because both of my parents were pilots in the Air Force. So I always knew that it existed, but I didn't know that I wanted to actually come here until I took an aero class back at the academy called Aero 456, and we came out here to Edwards and we got to fly a T-38 and run a little test program, and that honestly sealed the deal. I was like, I know I want to come out to test pilot school.
So that's really cool. You know, has being here been what you expected, or have there been a lot of surprises?
There have been some surprises. I think the biggest thing that I noticed is how much effort goes into the test pilot school from other agencies. You know, you come here and you think like, oh, it's going to be so much work for me, but really it's a ton of work for everybody else to try to get this whole program running and get us through the curriculum on time in just the short year that we're here. And I think the other surprise that I had was the list of airplanes that I've flown has grown like exponentially in the last couple of months. It's been so much fun, but it's amazing how many planes they get out here so that we can have different flying experiences and things that we're totally uncomfortable in, and it's been awesome.
Well, they say when you come to TPS, the first thing they do is make you very comfortable or used to being uncomfortable. And when you came here, you flew a very big plane, a KC-135. That was your aircraft.
Yeah, that's true. KC-135, it's pretty big. It's certainly not the biggest in the inventory, but it's definitely bigger than anything that we fly in the curriculum. But we actually do fly the KC-135 for 2 flights in the curriculum, which was awesome. I've flown it once now in the last year, and I absolutely loved it. It was great to be back in my home platform. But they do make you very comfortable being uncomfortable. My primary aircraft is the T-38 here, which I didn't actually fly in pilot training. I was fortunate I flew the T-1 in pilot training. So it's been very fun to learn a new plane and learn how, how people fly smaller planes, which is really, really fun. And it's totally different than how people fly big planes. So that's been a great experience. And my list, I actually wrote down my list of planes that I've flown now since I've been here. Okay. Turns out the number's 13, 13 different planes, wow, which is incredible. It ranges from helicopters to 3 different types of gliders, to the KC-135, which is the biggest one I've flown so far in the curriculum. And then just last week I got to fly what's called the Extra 300, and I got to pull negative 4 Gs, which was very painful, but really, really fun.
So you graduated from the academy, and you're here now at Edwards at the Test Pilot School. What is it like to be around so much knowledge and technology?
You know, it's overall very, very humbling. You come out of your field, and you know, back at McConnell, I was like one of the #1 pilots at the base, and probably the one with some of the most education compared to the other pilots. So you think like, oh, I'm pretty smart, but then you come here, and oh my goodness, I'm so not the smartest one in the room ever, which is so different for me, and it's very, very humbling. And you can't say to yourself, like, oh, I'll make it through because, you know, that guy made it through and I'm much smarter than him. You can't say that anymore because everybody's so smart here. And it's really, really incredible to be, like, considered one of the people here, you know, and to be here around everybody who's just incredible.
So, Captain Chiarte, can you tell us about the test management program that you're working on?
Sure, yeah. I'm a part of HAV Sniffer, and we got our name because the equipment that we're testing sniffs out different signals of opportunity that just kind of exist in nature. Not really in nature, actually. They're cell phone signals, but nowadays they kind of exist in nature. So we're flying a system that was developed by the University of California down at Irvine, and we're flying it on a C-12J model, which is a stretch model of the C-12, and the C-12 is just a 2-propeller kind of King Air looking aircraft. And the system, yes, it sniffs out cell phone signals. And what those cell phone signals allow us to do is eventually develop a navigation solution. So, for example, if GPS was degraded or something like that, you could use cell phone towers to navigate, which is a really interesting prospect. And we're totally at the infancy of this technology, but it's really interesting to fly this system and be able to see what, I guess, how it could work in the future.
Any idea what may or may not happen with your test management program after you're finished?
I have no idea, honestly. I think so. I'm suspecting that everything will work. At least that's my optimistic hope, is that everything's going to work. We start flying actually tomorrow. The plane and the equipment arrives today, and I think everything will work. And then in the future, what will eventually, hopefully, the goal is that this technology will be used to generate real-time navigation solutions. So, like, instead of having a GPS on my plane, I could have a cell phone tower receiver on my plane, and the cell phone tower receiver could give me a live update on my navigation solution, which would be really super interesting. But we'll see. Right now, we're just trying to turn everything on and make sure it works.
So, Captain Chiarte, let's fast forward to your graduation. Any ideas where you're going to go next?
Yes, so I will be heading down to Altus Air Force Base down in southwestern Oklahoma, and I'm going to go to KC-46 training, actually. So I'm going to be swapping tankers, the new tanker platform. And it'll be about a 3-month course there, and then I'll come back to Edwards, and I'll join the 418th, which is the heavy test squadron here, doing KC-46 testing for probably about a year, and then after that I talked to some guys there, and I should be able to pick up a second qual, so maybe the KC-135 again, and I'll be flying 2 airplanes. But at least for the initial year after I graduate, I'll be a KC-46 test pilot.
So, Captain Chiarte, do you have any advice for those who will follow you here at TPS, but also as well as those who are thinking they may want to apply to attend the school?
Absolutely. I would say apply early and apply often. I applied the first year that I was barely eligible. I actually wasn't even eligible when I applied to TPS. I had to submit a waiver. But I got in, which was amazing. So I'd say apply early, apply often. And in the meantime, fly as much as you can and fly as many different things as you can. I think that really kind of helped me to get in here, was flying a few different types of aircraft before starting TPS. And I'd also say challenge yourself within your own airframe with different missions. I think one thing that made me kind of competitive was I had done every single mission of the tanker before I got here. Instead of just the conventional mission, I was also qualified in like the nuclear mission, the receiver mission, the special operations mission, which kind of gave me a really broad base of experience, even though I hadn't flown it for all that long. And I think that really kind of helped me to be a competitive tanker pilot. So that would be the advice that I give any pilots who are wanting to come here to TPS. And also get a master's degree and make sure your grades are pretty good, because I think they look at that as well.
Well, Captain Chiarte, before I let you go, you're here at historic Edwards Air Force Base, and you're a young captain in the Air Force, and you're flying, and you're at TPS. What does it all mean to you?
It's extremely humbling to be at a place like Edwards Air Force Base. And oftentimes, I honestly forget that I'm here and what it means to be here, because I'm so bogged down with homework and projects and things like that. But every once in a while, I'll stop and realize, like, oh my goodness, like, I'm at test pilot school. Like, Chuck Yeager was the commandant. Buzz Aldrin went, like, the incredible amount of people who came through here and graduated and went on to do incredible things. And so every once in a while you remember that and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm now one of the people who've walked these halls. So it's incredibly humbling, and even though I oftentimes do forget where I am because I'm so busy all the time, it's incredible. I can't believe I'm here.
Many thanks to Captain Rachel Chiarte for joining us and taking us beyond the test. So what's on the horizon for the test pilot school? We'll go back to Colonel Blake for the answer. Welcome back to Edwards Beyond the Test. We're talking about the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School located right here at Edwards Air Force Base, and back with us in studio is the school's commandant, Colonel Ryan Blake. Colonel Blake, you're not only the current commandant of TPS, but you're also a graduate of the school back in 2008. You were already flying F-15Es back then. So was becoming a test pilot your goal early on in your career?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it was a goal early on in my life.
Really?
When I was 12 years old, I decided I wanted to be a test pilot. So I kind of worked backwards from there. I figured out, what do I need to become a test pilot? Well, I should go into the Air Force. I should be an Air Force pilot. I should get an engineering degree, and I should go to a commissioning source, right? So I worked all of that backwards. And so from the time I was 12 years old, I decided these are the things I need to do to be a test pilot. So yes, the short answer is yes, it has been a goal of mine in my entire career. Now, I loved my operational career flying F-15Es. I thought it was great. But after 2 operational tours, that passion and desire to go to TPS really welled up again, and I was really excited to be able to apply because now if I got accepted, I would be able to take all those lessons that I learned and frankly, some of the stuff maybe that I didn't like about the Strike Eagle that I thought could be improved, or just the stuff that I saw coming down the horizon that I knew was going to make the Strike Eagle a better airplane. I could go through test pilot school and have a hand in developing that and make all the old me's, the Lieutenant Blakes of the future, have a much better airplane when they got to it. And so excited me about being part of that.
At 12 years old, who or what inspired you to be that mindful of your future and not an easy path to choose?
Right. So I think a couple of different things. I actually grew up in an aviation family. My father was a pilot. My grandfather was a pilot. My father was not a pilot in the Air Force. He was a commercial pilot, and he did a lot of flight instruction. So I think a desire to be involved in aviation came from my family. And then, like many folks, I think a combination of watching the space shuttle when I was young and watching movies like The Right Stuff really got me excited about doing something towards the unexplored, as the test center says.
Well, no doubt the curriculum of TPS has certainly changed since you were in the '08 Alpha class. Is that correct, the Alpha class
That's
for
right.
'08?
Exactly.
Yeah, but isn't it always evolving, though, to meet the needs of the Air Force of the future?
It most definitely is. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I was most surprised about when I came back as the commandant is how much it had changed just in the 10 years since I had graduated. And it actually really impressed me as how far the test pilot school had come and how agile they are to changing to new realities. And one of the things we've been doing over the last couple of years is try to keep that going. And as you know right now, if you look in the news, right, space is a growth industry, right? We now have another military service in the Department of Defense, the U.S. Space Force.
That's right.
And so we've been working very closely with them. Even before the startup of the U.S. Space Force, we realized, and the Air Force Test Center under General Zana's leadership has realized that there is much work yet to do in space test. And so we've been in close coordination with U.S. Space Force about setting up a course specifically for them that mirrors what our test pilot school is doing and that is based on the very same test foundations that we are teaching our atmospheric flight test pilots and flight test engineers how to do, but give them some domain-specific training in space. So we'll take that test foundations that we're teaching already, and we will teach them how that applies to orbital mechanics and to missile launches and things like that, such that now the Space Force can have a cadre of trained testers just like the U.S. Air Force has their cadre of trained testers.
That is exciting.
It absolutely is.
Do you have an idea of when that's going to start up?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we are hoping to start our first course next year. So we are working on the curriculum right now, and we are hoping that somewhere January or February of 2021, we can have our first space testers go through the course.
I think you're going to need a bigger building.
Absolutely. most definitely. So just like anything, resources get to be a big factor. And so we are looking at ways that we can expand both in our building and in our cadre, right? The instructors that we need to teach, we'll need to bring in folks, we don't have a whole lot of extra time right now because we're very busy teaching our test pilots and flight test engineers. So extra instructors, extra program managers to help really make this a good school.
Colonel Blake, since your first Air Force assignment in January 1998, you've held some really impressive jobs, But today you find yourself back at Edwards and serving as the Commandant of the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School. How does this mission support the warfighter? And overall, what does this job opportunity mean to you?
It means the world to me. So I remember being a student at test pilot school thinking that I had the coolest job in the world. And I was very much excited about going to my first test squadron and bringing all that new technology to the warfighter. But I very much enjoyed being a student in the school and doing all the things that the school got to do. And so whereas I wanted to go directly into my flight test work, I really wanted at some point to come back on staff at the school and be a part of it. And so when I got the call to come out and be the commandant of the test pilot school, to sit at the same desk that Buzz Aldrin and Chuck Yeager had sat at, it really was a dream come true. And everything we do is focused on the warfighter, right? That's what made me want to go into flight test. And all of our students, that's what makes them want to go to test pilot school, is because we are taking new gear and new technology and handing it directly back to the warfighters. So just like the Air Force Test Center that is always having a relentless focus on the warfighter, and the 412th Test Wing, whose motto is for the warfighter, right? We at Test Pilot School are very much focusing everything we're doing on learning how to test and getting good technology directly into the hands of the warfighter who need to use it now.
Many thanks to Colonel Ryan Blake and all our guests from the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School for taking time out to share their stories and taking us beyond the test. We invite our listeners to submit their suggestions for future episodes by sending us an email at beyondtest@412tw.us. Thanks to all for joining us. I'm Dawn Waldman for Edwards Beyond the Test.